What's up, bro? Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
How you doing today?
I'm in a sassy mood, so I hope you got your sassy pants on.
Well, bro, I just got blocked by Mr. Lofton over there at Raisins and Drama for asking him what his favorite flavor of Skittles is. So I guess I'm feeling pretty sassy too.
Woo! Well, you must have done something bad because Lofton wouldn't block anybody for no reason.
Well, he don't want anybody slandering him over some Skittles, man. Anyway,
Well, there's a lot of slander and libel out there. In fact, every person that disagrees with anybody is literally
yeah,
engaging in libel and slander. And yeah, exactly.
that's right, bro. Well, I was wondering if we could talk about the canonicity of Second Peter, kind of really specific.
Yeah, it's open for me. Talk about whatever you want. And by the way, I don't. Some people might be surprised, but I don't actually know everything. That's a boomer joke, right? Boomers love that. Y'all might be surprised, but I don't know everything. And so, even though it is open forum debate, I don't know everything, and so there may be topics that I don't know about, and I don't have a problem saying I don't know about that. So sure, go ahead.
Well, that's kind of my issue with it. So, I'm a Christian, just to lay the foundation first and foremost, and I don't have a problem with the canon. I'm not coming to bring the argument, but folks like Bart Ehrman, John Dominic Crossan,
A lot of the liberal-minded people.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
they love to pick on it when they're not picking on Paul's epistles.
Right.
And I don't know why. I've been studying it a lot, and it seems really obvious to me that Second Peter is canon, from internal evidence as well as quick canonization from the beginning of the church. But prior to its canonization, and I think the first mention of it directly was by Origen, if I remember right. But in my opinion, several of the church fathers, Clement of Rome being the earliest that I can find, either quote it, directly allude to it, or somewhere in between. Justin Martyr's another one. The Epistle of Barnabas is another piece. But I think where I'm struggling, and I'd like some help, I'd like to write an article about it and get it published, is how do I develop a continuously strong argument against that liberalism? Because as you know, when people go to Chapel Hill over here near my house where Bart Ehrman teaches, and they're hit with that, they've never been challenged
Yeah.
at all with canon or not taught church history, which is common in Protestant churches, as you know. They're quick to give up the faith. They're quick to apostatize and bring stupid arguments back.
That's true.
Right.
Yeah, my first comment would be that, I've heard these arguments for many years, and when I was Protestant, the first thing I did when I wanted to focus on resolving this question between Protestantism and, Orthodox Catholicism or whatever, it was going to be about the formation of the canon. So I went and read a whole bunch of Protestant scholars on the formation of the canon. And what I realized in that process was that I think, textual scholarship has a place. It's very important. St. Jerome was a textual scholar. Origen was a textual scholar. I'm not a fan of Origen, but I mean, it had its place, and his witness is useful, even as a heretic, in terms of the hexapla and all the work that he did. But what I'm getting at is that it's the order of theology and the order of approach is wrong. Because the way that we're going to figure out and know the correct canon, in my view, it can't be divorced from the historical church that preserved those texts and by whose testimony we rely on the idea that they were authored by apostles. So in other words, the idea that I'm going to go to a bunch of academics who will then determine the authorship and determine the authenticity actually itself arises out of both the Renaissance and the Protestant tradition. So while it's true that this can be insightful, we don't go to the scholars and the academics first and foremost, because that's the wrong-headed approach of theology, and it's the wrong order of theology. And that's actually that's whether Luther intended this or not, whatever. The result of Lutheranism and Luther's challenges to the canonicity of Second Peter and all these other things is the beginning of German higher critical textual doubt. Okay, so.
Right.
So my point is that the solving of this question, the solution to this question, is ultimately a question of which church preserved this tradition. Because, for example, you might be able to have textual indicators that maybe Matthew, the apostle, wrote Matthew's gospel, but there's nothing internal to that will prove it. So the point is that you have to have the tradition of the church and the bishops themselves that have passed on this tradition that this is the gospel written by Matthew, the apostle. And I know that apostolic authorship is not the only thing that goes into canonicity, but it's part of it. And the only way to know that is by virtue of the oral tradition and liturgical tradition of the church. And that church is not a Protestant church. It's the church of the first 1,000 years. So my point is that this question is actually going to lead you into orthodoxy, or it's going to lead you into, like you said, apostasy, because, I mean, by default, who does the Protestant church listen to? There's no authoritative ecclesiastical structure in Protestantism because it's premised on the denial of a public authoritative ecclesiastical structure. Therefore, it defaults to academia and asking the professors at Heidelberg University what the correct canon of Scripture is, you see.
Right. Or whoever has the nicest Cosby sweater. There's definitely a change of heart now.
Or whoever has the best lisp in a Cosby sweater.
Well, I mean, it's pretty compelling, bro. I kind of wish I had one, but I'm going for the Gages and Goth appearance first, I think. I need to go through that phase.
Yeah, if you read Lee McDonald's book, Formation of the Christian Biblical Canon, he'll list all of the different early canonical lists. Okay, so there's about
I didn't read it.
Okay, you did?
I did.
Okay, cool.
I've been digging into it a lot. It's just the as you can imagine, it's frustrating because it feels like I'm dealing with like an appeal to a personal bias when confronting these guys. I've talked to Bart in his office even. He's very open to it and very nice. But the appeal they always make is that, 2 John, 3 John, I think Jude, and I think Apocalypse, maybe. I could be wrong on that one.
Mm-hmm.
But they're not in the earliest formations of the canon, right? Like with Tatian's Diatessaron, you've got the Gospels.
Yeah, but
Acts,
so what? I mean, on what basis are we supposed to know that is the way as a Protestant we go about determining the canon? You understand? There's a prior epistemic.
No,
go ahead.
Well, I do, and that's where I make an appeal to the liturgical tradition,
right.
Which I think that's an obvious approach.
Right. Well, that's how the church determined the canon.
Well, and
Partly.
they're usually the two last things I'll say, then I'll give the stage up. The one point they don't like is that 2 Peter's Greek style is very different in how it's written from 1 Peter. But what seems obvious there is 1 Peter is written by a scribe, which signs their signature at the end of 1 Peter. And then 2 Peter claims to write it in his own hand in an urgent tone, right? And that's why we believe it's close to his death, because he knows his death is coming. And I make that appeal too, but generally it gets so exhausting in my opinion, and I want to know your advice.
Well, but we don't have autographa, right? So I mean, I don't see why, if these are copies, that's even a big deal. Like why is that a big deal? Like nobody has Peter's original letter. We have later copies, and that's why this is really not. I'm not talking about you, but most Protestants, I think, have a problem here, because if you want to say that we're really only bound by the authoritative written text, then why is it not? Why didn't God preserve for us providentially the autographa?
Well, and that's where. And I am Protestant, Jade. I'm not trying to hide that from you.
No, I understand.
But that's where I've been making arguments against sola scriptura, too, that are appealing to me, because not even about the autographa, but the agrapha that's mentioned a lot, even by Paul in his letters, right? These are not gospel-written phrases we have from Jesus, but also in the way Protestants do worship or pray. It's not sola scriptura behavior.
Absolutely.
Right. Or even having coffee machines in the front of the church.
No, that is
bring it to
mentioned.
my
That is
elders
mentioned in Acts. That
recently
is
in
in
my
Acts.
church now.
No, you're wrong there. That is in Acts. In fact, Acts says that you got to have a Starbucks in the narthex, or else it's your whole service is illegit, dude.
Yeah. Well, I've got the Starbucks cup, so I guess I'm good in both worlds then. Pascal's wager for Starbucks coffee.
Right. Yeah, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. So there's not. Well, that's an argument I've been making, is that if the regulative principle were true according to classical Reformation theology and Calvinist theology, then we would have a written liturgical pattern from the apostles, presumably.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's where Protestants are not. They're not consistent with the phrase sola scriptura. They don't realize how binding that phrase actually is.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's frightening how binding it would be. No one can live up to it. It's almost like trying to keep with the Mosaic law. We're trying to keep with something we don't have.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I remember, so let me give an example. I know you may know this, but like when I was in a Calvinist church, we were having like a traditional hardcore Calvinist Westminster Confession church. We would have debates within that tiny splinter denomination of whether you could sing psalms or hymns, right? Like, are you bound by solo hymnody, or can you a solo psalmody, or can you also have hymns? And literally, the church, basically that little denomination, basically split. So it's like. But what that illustrates is that the arguments were, well, now wait a minute, Nadab and Abihu show that like you can't offer strange fire, right? You can't do, I'm gonna offer incense the way I want to do it. No, you get struck dead. Ergo, regulative principle of worship. So
it's not up to me; it's up to God.
Absolutely.
I don't get to tell God how I'm going to worship Him.
Right, and so therefore,
I can, but I deserve death.
Exactly. So therefore, where is the New Testament worship service written out? It ought to be, if we're going to die from doing it wrong.
Yeah.
If Protestantism's true.
Yeah. Absolutely.
I mean, what about in Lutheranism? Because I came out of the Missouri Synod. For example, I believe it's even stated in the Catechism that the doctrine of absolute divine simplicity in the filioque, like that's not in Scripture. Like, why isn't that stated? And I'm sure I could go through the Catechism, or we could do the Westminster Confessions and find a whole list of things that would be considered doctrine that wouldn't fit the sola scripture.
Well, that's when the Westminster Confession says explicit or implicit in Scripture. So they'll say that it's implicit, but this is getting to be arbitrary, which is like, well, no, wait a minute. So yeah, exactly.
According to who?
Yeah, exactly.
According to this guy or that guy.
Right.
It's circular, right? If we boil it down epistemically, there's no point to even talk about it with them.
Right.